Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, and at the time of this recording, I am preparing for what is supposed to be a snowstorm tomorrow, which is fine with me because it reminds me how much I'm going to enjoy just the next day going to Florida where I'm going to visit my mother, and the weather is like in the upper 70s. It's crazy. I can't wait for spring. Anyway, if you missed last week's episode, let me tell you about it because it was really a special one. It was part one of 2 interviews with Colin Cowie, the iconic planner designer who creates luxury experiences. I know you all know him, but let me list some of his clients. They include Oprah, Elton John, Nicole Kidman, Michael Jordan, Jennifer Aniston, Jerry Seinfeld, Kim Kardashian, and Tom Cruise, major charitable fundraisers, numerous Fortune 500 corporate clients. And I had the pleasure of Colin being my first luxury experience. I got to thank Colin to this day for having me, for breaking that whole market open for me. We did some major weddings that appeared in major magazines and a book of his. So I know firsthand the indescribable experiences that he creates and produces. And I wanted to get in this interview with Colin something that we had all never heard before. And I got a whole lot that we had never heard before. So it is a must listen. Go back last week, listen to part one, and get ready because sometime next month, I'm going to be releasing part 2. That's right. Went to his office in New York recently and got a very exciting part 2. So catch up with part 1 and then you'll get there. So before I introduce who today's guest is, the particular person that I interviewed struck me as really authentic and driven by his heart. That's even part of the title. And I want to say that I totally resonate. Like, it's so easy for us to get caught up in the business of what we do. But like so many of these interviews express, so many of these guests talk about the foundation of all of this is really our connection with our clients. And I think many of you know I have a music and entertainment company called Kushner Entertainment. And I believe, related to that, what gave me my competitive edge long ago was when I first created the company-owned bands that I have, Sound Connection, Rhythm 6, Sound Nation, and Pop Culture Strings. But what it was that I purposely seeked out atypical singers and instrumentals who don't just imitate whoever's on the radio, but bring their artistry to it. And again, that's what comes back to authenticity. And I know that that's what people respond to from all these years. This is so key and the heart to my own philosophy, having chosen these kind of performers who are not just greatly talented, but know how to connect with our clients. And I think that all of us in our businesses, in the event and wedding industry, the people we pick, they got to understand that. Like, that's got to be something somehow we got to figure out in the interviews, is that they understand why they're there. It's not just to collect a check, that there's not only even passion for what we do, but they understand that it is about being of service for our clients. So, when I relate it back again to my music business, not only do we give a great performance, but again, it's all about connecting. And so the band is not just connecting with the couple or any special guest, but the whole crowd. And so one of the other points I want to make is that it starts ahead of time. And again, that is like the thread that ties every one of these amazing, iconic guests together, is how they get to know their clients ahead of time and get to know their dreams and their vision. And even us, like being, I hate that word, vendors, partners, even on our end. And for me, entertainment, or whether it's photography, video, whatever it is, if we can get to know the client in that way, and if there's some situation where we can't, and, either way, right, we still get to connect with the planner and designer and really dig in, not just get handed a timeline, but find out as much as we can about the personality of our clients so that we can create an experience for them. That's what I do. It's not real typical with entertainment, but that's my approach. And today's guest is the epitome of this. And before I introduce him, I would love to just mention if you could check out my site at KushnerEntertainment.com. Just released a new one a couple months ago, so I'm still very excited. So yes, a shameless plug. So in terms of today's guest, it is Bill Bowen, videographer out of Washington, D.C. And again, I believe emotion is the driving force that makes him so good, and you're going to hear why. Also, he generously shares some of his best tips and ideas that make him who he is. He does weddings, corporate events, legacy films, tells a great story about that and various special occasions. And, it's interesting, we didn't get into it during the interview, but he also films a lot of very high-end South Asian weddings and has millions of views. Yes, millions of views of some of his highlight reels. And so maybe one day I'll interview him again and we'll get into how he did that. Also want to urge you to listen to our follow-on segment, which comes out on Wednesday, The Next Level, in which my co-hosts and I tease out some of the highlights to help you build your business even further, take it to another level. And the guest co-host is going to be destination planner and designer Valerie Gernhauser of Sapphire Events, headquartered out of New Orleans, who I interviewed in 2017. And we just together recorded The Next Level, and it's really great. So check it out on Wednesday. So now enjoy my conversation with Bill Bowen. So Bill, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for coming over here. I understand that prior to becoming a videographer, you were a private investigator. That really grabbed my attention. What kind of work did you do with that?
Well, my dad was a lawyer, so most of his stuff was domestic relations, divorce, cheating husbands, cheating wives, that kind of stuff.
Oh, you got the good stuff.
I got the good stuff. I got to see the bad side of everything. And that's why when I started to be a wedding videographer, I started seeing the good side of everything.
Yeah. But when you were doing that, so were you using video and photo? Is that your tools of the trade?
Yeah. A lot of times we did stakeout work where we would go and one of the spouses would have a rental pad and they would meet their, person they're cheating with.
Right.
So I had to determine if they were there alone overnight. So we would get there ahead of time in a van I had van with mirrored windows.
God, this is like the movies.
Yeah. And we would establish that there's no one in the apartment, knock on the door, call it. And then if no one answered, we can assume that there's no one there. And then we would see both people enter.
Yeah.
The next morning, both people would exit.
Yeah.
After they exited, a lot of times they would kiss each other in the parking lot. And we had all that on film.
Listen, everyone's going to want to know, what about the footage in between? You kind of skipped from entering the apartment to leaving.
We stayed in the parking lot. So we needed to prove that they had opportunity to do whatever they were going to do. So lawyers like that, and it really made, the case easy for the other side.
But what's interesting to me is that even as a private investigator, you were still basically capturing a story about people. I mean, obviously not ones they wanted you to capture, but was there anything when you were younger, growing up as a child or even later, because it has such an impact on who we are today, that helped spark that passion for capturing people's stories in general?
Well, my dad was always taking videos of us, film, 8mm film back then.
Yeah.
And when we were kids, we would always hold our fingers up, like, get away, Dad, and we'd run from the camera.
Yeah.
But now that I look back at that stuff, it's absolute gold. I mean, it told a story of where we went, Yosemite Park, and all the vacations, and how everybody looked when they were younger. And it really told a story of family life. And so basically, once my wife became pregnant and my daughter was on the way, I started a flashback of Dad. I said, well, I need to record all this stuff like my dad did. So about a month before she was due, I went out and bought a lot of expensive video equipment just for recording my daughter. And we didn't have the money, so I put it on the credit card, and it was like $5,000. Which was,
well, in those days,
back in the 80s, it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And when you didn't have a whole lot.
Wow, you really went for it. That's interesting.
I bought the good stuff because I knew, what we had to have. So she's born. I take videos of everything. My wife doesn't know how much this stuff cost. And I had to figure out a way to pay for this. And I noticed that in the Washington Post, they had a section called Wedding Bells. And I said, oh, well, maybe I can do weddings. Maybe I can make some money on this besides private investigating stuff. And I put a little $5 ad in there, 2-line, do your wedding for $50. I think it was 50
Can
or 75.
you imagine today?
Yeah. And I got like 10 calls. I mean, I was blown away. First of all, I didn't know anything about weddings. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. So I went and did my first wedding. And then I said, well, after the wedding was over, I wasn't in the right spot. I couldn't see the bride's face for this or whatever. And it was almost like a trial by doing. And I would come back each time I did a wedding and say, okay, well, this has to be fixed this time. This has to be. And by the time I had the 5th or 6th wedding, I was in the right space, right place at the right time. I had the audio, had the color. It started looking pretty good.
Did you enjoy it right from the start? I mean, the fact that it was a wedding.
I did, because I like working with people, and I really like being present when it's a really big deal. It's a family milestone. And being there, everybody's happy, everybody's excited. It's a good time for people. And I just love watching everything unfold. I like, one of my favorite parts is when dad comes in and sees the bride for the first time in the dress. And he stops at the doorway and starts crying.
Yeah.
It's like, I almost dropped the camera.
I can see you're moved right now talking about it.
Yeah. So, I've got a daughter that's, in her early 30s, and she's going to be getting married someday. So a lot of times I say, wow, that could be me standing at that doorway one day. And, to see the pride on the parent's face that the daughter's getting married. And, it's just, everybody's at their best. And it really makes for a great video, great drama.
I love that you're moved right now talking about it because, I think about for video and photography, in order to capture these emotional moments, like to know, to catch it and to film it in a certain way, if you're moved, I would think it's going to reflect the emotion of that moment.
Right. I think what's important when you're hiring a videographer or a photographer, that they know what the moments are ahead of time. So I know when people come into the room for the first time, or grandpa comes into the room for the first time, I know there's going to be hugging and kissing. There's going to be this outpouring of, emotion. You need to be recording. You need to be in the right spot. You need to have your head screwed on to make sure that you get that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of times it's from personal experience. When I first started out, I would be shooting something that I thought was important. Then I turn my head and something great is happening behind me. And then that made a mental note of that. I said, that will never happen again. I will be ready for that. And so it takes a while sometimes for a videographer to really get to the point where he almost anticipates what's going to happen.
Yeah, that seems like kind of a skill that is impossible to really put your finger on. It's almost intuitive.
Yeah.
It's almost like you're feeling also what's going on in the room, right? That's the impression I get.
Right.
And so being open to that.
Right. A lot of times when the bride, comes out in her dress for the first time, the bridesmaids are going to ooh and ah, and there's going to be this reaction.
Yeah.
So while it's good to have the bride come out and she's smiling and having a good time, it's always good to have another camera shooting the people's reactions to that. So the whole idea of what we do is if someone couldn't make it to your wedding, grandmother was sick or something in Florida, if she was watching the video, she was the one in the room looking around and getting emotional. So that's what we want to do.
That's what you're thinking also in a sense.
Right, because we're shooting for someone else's eyes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and also your video really, in a sense, becomes the memory of the family years and years later and decades later. It is the memory.
That's right. Yeah. What we film is what they're going to be watching for the next 50 years.
Yeah.
And I still meet up with clients who say, my kids watch our video over and over and over. In fact, when we were doing, in the old days, VHS, I would have this lady regularly call me like every year or two and say, send me 5 more VHSs. And I said, what's wrong? What happened? So I literally wore them out.
Wow.
Broke the tape.
Wow.
And so now everything is MP4s in the computer, so it'll last forever and you can watch it a million times.
Can you take me through your general process, starting from when you first meet with a wedding client and all the way through to the event? What is that like typically for you?
Well, when I first meet with them, since everybody's really kind of unique and different, I ask them what they're looking for. I don't assume that what I did on the last wedding is going to be what they're going to want. And so from talking to them about what they expect and the type of wedding they're going to be doing, I get a pretty good idea of what's going to be happening. And then I talk to them about what are the most important moments are important to you. What are the things that you have to have? And what are the things that you've always thought about when growing up and being married?
That's a great question. Yeah, everyone has their dream.
So brides have ideas like, I had one bride said, I love the back of my dress. It's called the Lady Di shot. And the Lady Di shot was a shot from an upper balcony in that huge cathedral of her dress stretched out. And then while she's going down and their dress is stretched out, from that same angle, you can see people's faces looking back at her.
Ooh, I love
getting
that.
their reaction.
Yeah.
So you're getting the dress, you're getting the reaction. It's a very powerful shot. So a lot of times, if I can find those little things out of what's important, I'll do it. And a lot of times they may have grandparents or great-grandparents that are going to stand up at their chair and they're going to pretend to dance one time.
And you want to catch that.
You need to catch it.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I'll actually interview a grandparent or something.
Yeah, I know you have another business, Legacy, what do you call it?
Legacy Films.
Okay.
And that's basically interviews about the patriarchs of the family. And a lot of times, people should never leave this earth unless their stories are told. And I've interviewed some people that I was just blown away. I was almost jealous that they've done so much and they were such good people that, you know, future generations that aren't even born yet are going to want to see who this person was.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine going back to your great-grandfather, if you had your great-grandfather, half an hour of him talking about his father, his father's father, how he, you know, lived, how valuable would that be?
Yeah, you know what this makes me think? Well, before I started doing the podcast and honed more, you know, the skills of interviewing and conversation, I was interested in capturing my father and my mother. And thank God I did. I interviewed them separately in my way back then and together. And thank God I did, because it was just a couple of years later, my father then got diagnosed with cancer, you know, and eventually passed away. And so that footage is precious. You know, precious. And we'll come back to weddings in a minute and the process, but I looked through your site and there was one that knocked me out. I believe it was someone who was in hospice, literally. And can you tell me about that story?
So I got a call from a gentleman in California, and he says, my mother just went into hospice care in Richmond. And he was emotional on the phone. And he says, you need to go down and interview her. He said his life is complicated, and for whatever reason, he wasn't there. And so it was my duty to go down and catch her. So I go down to Richmond, I knock on the door, and she opens the door, and he didn't tell her I was coming. So she looked surprised, and when I told her why I was there, I started crying. And then I said, the reason I'm here is because your life matters.
Oh,
and the things that you have done in the past for the family has shaped the entire family. You are probably the most important person in the family, and you cannot leave this earth. You cannot leave us without telling me your story. Well, she was set back a little bit, and she invited me in. And when she went to go fix her face, I noticed she had these albums, these huge albums all over the house. So I figured best way for me to get candid information out of her, since she didn't know I was coming, didn't know anything about this, would be to sit on the couch, put the camera in a general area on the couch, and start going through some of these albums.
Oh, wow.
She comes out of the bathroom, and I had the album opened to a page that showed an old car, 1935 Packard. And I said, tell me about this. Who are these people in the back of this car? I love this car. So she comes and sits down next to me on the couch. And for the next 2 hours, she was back in 1935. She was actually growing up and not worrying about dying soon. And after 2 hours, she was tired. And I'd gotten a lot of information from her. So I asked her the $64 question. I said, future generations are going to be seeing this video. They're not going to know you at all. And what advice would you give them how to live life? And I really can't do her justice of how she said it, but she basically says, love and respect your parents, but you need to find your own way. Don't ever let anybody tell you what you need to be doing, because you'll never be happy. And which is pretty sound advice as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, one of the most satisfying parts of my job is when I leave a legacy or I leave a wedding and I'm driving home and I know that in my camera on that little SD card, I've captured that family's event, especially with weddings. I basically I have the honor to go and be present when a new family is born.
Oh, what a beautiful way of putting that.
Yeah, because basically when you get married, that's the nucleus of the new family. And I was there at the beginning, and it's really nice years later to see people come up and say, yeah, I got 5 kids now, and we watch the video all the time.
You know, I want to ask you too, there's still a business to this too, obviously. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, I love the way you yourself are emotionally attached to what you're doing. I've seen your work. It's stunning. And now I even understand more about where that comes from, the source of it for you. But also making this a business, you know, because you did go from part-time, you know, you were a private investigator, you're building the business. I've met your team members. You have incredible people. You're managing people. You're dealing with clients. You've got finances to consider. How do you view that side of it? Because you've also built, to me, that's a whole nother skill. And there's this, you know, typical, you know, kind of conflict between art and business. How do you look at it?
Well, I mean, basically I started small. It was just me doing everything. Shooting, editing, advertising, the whole thing. My wife helped me a little bit. Actually, my mom actually did my books, that kind of thing. Then I slowly brought on people as I was growing. And basically what I do is I charge enough money for me to make a living and to make sure that all my employees are handled right. So I don't have a lot of subcontractors. So there are some people that, you know, basically hire other people to do all their work. Mm-hmm. All my people are full-time.
How many do you have?
I have 5 people full-time.
It's a lot of responsibility.
Right. So there is a little bit of pressure to keep bringing in the work every month. Mm-hmm. So, but basically everybody that works for me shoots and edits, and they're all part of the team.
Yeah, but also you've expanded. You continue to expand since I've known you into industry work, corporate. You've got the legacy work. And so, you know, I'm curious about also how you approach price and value. You know, you mentioned you want to make sure that you have enough to live on. Are you looking at the number that you need and kind of working from there, working backward?
You know, I never thought about it that way.
Because that's a big issue from the industry side.
Yeah, there's some people that say I need $10 a year to make it. Mm-hmm. And how am I going to make that $10 a year? I basically charged what I thought my services were worth and had good work, and I really never had any trouble with the money part of it. I mean, I'm not $10,000 to do a wedding, $20,000 to do a wedding. So, you know, I didn't come from Harvard Business School, figured out I've got to make, you know, this much. My P&L statement has to show this. Mm-hmm. I just did my thing over the years, and I raised my rates as I thought, you know, the market would bear. Mm-hmm. And I've never really had a problem.
You know, I just want to take a moment and say, wouldn't we all like to have more exposure in our markets? I mean, certainly our own handling of social media and various other tools are ways that we do gain more presence. Though, what if you could have professional outside help that you could depend on to really get you the results that you need? And I know we all are happy to get much more presence. Well, I want to tell you about our sponsor of today, OFD Consulting. They are an award-winning publicity agency that focuses on the wedding industry, and their client portfolio ranges from top-tier planners and venues to well-regarded national brands and industry thought leaders. And OFD Consulting has placed clients in a slew of popular online and offline publications, including the New York Times, Martha Stewart Weddings, Style Me Pretty, many others. And they also have a service that's dedicated entirely to B2B press for those looking to elevate their brand reputation among peers through online mentions, guest articles, podcasts, and speaking engagements. So if you are a small business and you want to get your name out there, get more exposure for your brand, get your message out there, and you want to just like dip your toes in the PR waters, check out the OFD Collective, which is a 3-star membership with robust educational and coaching opportunities, along with ongoing press leads. So definitely check out ofdconsulting.com. Again, that's ofdconsulting.com. Well, I'm aware that you do a really great job of bringing in business, and you and I have spoken about social media. What do you think about that aspect of the world now? And you seem to understand it and really work well with it.
Right.
I imagine that's an integral part of your business now, is how you use social media.
Well, a lot of it was from my daughter, who's, she's a 20-some person, and she let me know how important social media was. So what we're starting to do now is, a lot of times she's trying to tell me that a lot of the current brides, the current young people, they don't respond well to commercials. Commercials are fake. They're not really real. So a long time ago, we decided to start putting the videos up online for other people to see. And these weren't demos. These weren't the best of whatever. Mm-hmm. These were actually what a bride and groom took home and loved.
Full length?
No, they'd be highlights.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to watch a 2-hour video.
That's why I wonder.
So it's a 6 or 8 minute highlight, and people would really get a good idea of the story of that bride and groom, and it wasn't a commercial pitch. So when Instagram started coming along, we started doing 1-minute Instagram pieces, and we would do them within 30 or 40 hours of the wedding. And we would send it to the bride and groom. They would flip, because they like to see, they need another injection of wedding.
And within a day and a half,
within 2 days. And we would go ahead and send them a download. They'd put it on their Instagram feed.
I was just going to say,
they would send it out.
You're getting the PR now.
Yeah, they'd send it out to all their friends. So we've had some videos get 2,000 views within, 10 days.
Wow.
And if we decided to push it, you'd even get more. So basically, the bride loves the work. All her friends get to see it. So in essence, you've got this expanding V of people that are going to be able to see your work, and it's not a commercial. It's a real wedding.
Well, and it's sincere. I mean, you're giving her, the couple, basically something that they really can enjoy in their friends, and you're taking care of business at the same time.
A lot of times they send these links out in email thank yous to people. And the good thing about the Instagram pieces is we use the best of getting ready, the best of pre-wedding, and best of the ceremony and the best of reception. Mm-hmm. Most of the people that come to the wedding don't see anything before the bride comes down the aisle. So all this stuff of dad crying early on, the bride and groom seeing each other for the first time, mom helping the bride getting her veil put on, all that is missed by people. Some of the best stuff happens before you go down the aisle.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time the bride comes down the aisle, there's a whole lot of emotional stuff that has come out. And, that's why a lot of times brides have to have, the makeup person kind of stay until the beginning of the reception, because there's going to be these waves of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And, I always tell people, they say, well, the ceremony starts at 12 noon. I want you to start there. And then I try to tell them, as much good stuff is happening before that, but sometimes they don't get it. So when I send them a video where all this good stuff, they can see it, they go, oh, yes, I want you there for that. Especially if dad's involved, because dads usually wind up paying for everything, and they're not really involved that much. They just pay for it and shut up like they should do. And to get a few seconds of dad coming in and just flipping out, seeing the bride, it's a done deal at that point.
And what about during the actual reception? I mean, now you're getting into the party mode. What is your approach to that part of the night?
Well, I'm a firm believer in you need to catch the action as naturally as possible. So there's really no reason for you to be standing on the bride's foot the entire night when you're shooting. So you get a long lens, you move back, you catch people, and a lot of times they don't even know what's going on. I've had brides call me or send me an email a few days after the wedding. This is before I did the Instagram pieces.
Like, where were you? Did you leave? That kind of a thing?
Really? Did you get this? Did you get that?
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I got all that stuff, but I just wasn't stepping on your foot while I was doing it.
Right.
So, there's the right way and, the wrong way. When I first came up, a lot of photographers would run onto the dance floor and pose people. And I was going, wow, why are they doing that? Because they're having such a good time. And they go from a good time to like saying cheese. And I never understood that. So now it's much more video journalism. and photojournalism.
Yeah.
To where I work with photographers that use the long lens and they take lots of pictures. And if they take 20,000 pictures, there's going to be a couple that are going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much harder for a photographer to catch the right perfect shot as is for video.
Yeah.
Because video moves
it's
the
running
whole time.
Yeah.
Right.
And with the technology, can't you, a frame grab or whatever, you can get good resolution?
We now have capabilities of shooting in 4K. So 4K is really a high enough format for you can make a decent picture. So let's say a father and the daughter are dancing and spinning around, and I'm shooting 30 images every second. So when dad turns the perfect shot, kisses the bride or smiles,
you got it.
I have it.
Yeah.
Photographer is going to have to be right on that and click it at that exact spot to get that shot. I already have it. And I have a lot more. So
yeah, it sounds overwhelming to me, but I guess you have an eye now, you're editors, and you can just catch it and you know what to grab.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What about, when asked, just for a moment, I want to go to industry work, because as a videographer who started with weddings in the social side, I understand the legacy work that you do, which is wonderful. But on the corporate side, it's a great way to, diversify your business also. What is the relation between the two? I would imagine it's a completely different way of shooting, or is it not necessarily? Like the weddings are so emotional.
Well, weddings are an event. So you follow the natural unfolding of the event. With corporate, it's usually a message. It's usually a purpose for the video.
Yeah.
So people come to us and say, well, we want a promo and we want to show our property and we want to do this and talk about the neighborhood if it's a real estate piece. So you have to script it. You have to get an overall objective, what you want to do. You have to script it. Who's going to say what? It's much more mechanical, much more thought out than a wedding. So it's a really different animal altogether.
Coming back into the whole industry in general, events, if you were helping a planner or a prospective wedding client to choose, a videographer, because, there's real good ones out there, then there's great. What is the difference, would you say? Like, how do you define the difference between a good videographer and a great one?
Well, there's people that have different styles that give different products to the client. So we were in competition with a videographer that gave like a 1.5-minute highlight and then gave you the raw footage. And I just thought his 1.5-minute highlight was awesome.
Yeah.
The guy was great, very creative. But most of my clients can't live on a 1.5-minute highlight. If grandma wants it, the kids want to see it. And giving someone raw footage, I believe, is an injustice. So what makes a videographer great, as opposed to its style, it's how long they've been in business, and whether you can trust them, capture the moments that you want.
Right.
It's the trust.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of new people in the business. Some of them don't know what they're doing. Some of them are very good. So it's almost, you really need to be aware. It's just like anything else. Like if you go to the Marriott's going to be the Marriott. It's like McDonald's. You know what you're going to get when you go there. But when you go to a private person and you're buying a creative service, you have to look at the creativity. You have to look at the dependability of the person behind what we're talking about. How long have you been in business? What happens? Do you have backup? Like if something happens, do you have someone you can call on that can do similar work to yours? A couple of years ago, one year we did 3 weddings at the last second from associates of ours that couldn't do the wedding. And they were single person. We wound up doing the wedding under their name, and everything turned out fine. But you don't have a second chance on events. It's going to go off no matter what. So you need to have your ducks in order. So
I'm going to add to this. I'm going to go back to kind of how we started when you were first starting to tell me the stories about capturing and how moved you were. I would say that if I'm personally interviewing a videographer and they've got all those other bases covered, if I'm sitting with you and I start to see you, I know you're feeling moved talking about it, you're the one I'm choosing. Because then I know you're going to be able to recognize and grab that emotion. So I'm going to add that to the list. I'm going to say, for me, that would be a big one.
Well, actually, I used to meet with 99% of my clients. Now, with the internet, I don't meet with every single one. I maybe meet with 40% of them. If they're real serious and video is very important to them, they come and meet me, or we meet. If it's not, if it's like a commodity and they're just getting me because they know that we're really good, and most likely it's going to be a good product, I don't meet with them. In fact, sometimes I can't even get them on the phone. So what makes me most nervous is when a party planner hires us and we really can never talk to the client. The party planner keeps the client. I don't understand why we can't talk to the client. So there's been some weddings where I've declined the wedding because if I can't talk to the client and make sure I know what the client wants, I just don't want the party planner coming to me and saying, you know, you didn't get this, you didn't get that. And it says, well, if you'd have let me talk to the client, I probably would have known to get that.
So you want, again, to me, it comes back to personal connection. It's so important.
Yeah,
you know, you want to connect with your client. Yeah. And again, I'm going to say it's so emotional. And I understand, you know, in certain cases, depending on the client, maybe what their schedule, who they are, how they deal, that, you know, they may have someone else handle it all for them. But I understand that in the end, this is all about capturing emotion. So I have just two more questions. If you were giving a master class to let's say, somewhat already experienced videographers, what would you focus on? You know, what are maybe the biggest or a couple of biggest, most important tips that you would give to a videographer who wants to aspire to get to like a level like yourself?
Well, I would say pay attention to the details. The details, the little things that you don't think are that important.
Like what, for example?
So I found out a long time ago that the dress and the bling and the stuff the bride wears, she's taken forever to choose that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you don't get details of that, you're doing someone a disservice. You know, they've worked forever with the florist to design the room, to get the right band, the right look. And if you don't capture all that stuff, it's really incomplete. If you go just for emotional stuff and you don't have a wider look of how the whole thing looked.
Yeah, it's almost thinking about the backstory, really.
Well, a lot of times I'll take the bride and groom into the main room before anybody gets in there. And the band is all there on the stage looking great. And I'll say, band, play their first dance. They want to do one last run through.
Yeah.
And I'll shoot them in their empty room that looks fantastic.
Bill, that's great.
Dancing by themselves, which is the way it should be. They should be the only ones on the planet as far as anybody's concerned that day. Then I take that footage, some of that slow mode footage, and incorporate that into the real live first dance. And it's fantastic. So I get my shot, I get the emotion of the bride and groom without anybody else in the room, and they get to practice with the band.
Well, and I'm also thinking in that moment, they're completely focused on each other. Completely.
Right.
There isn't this whole crowd around them. And
right. They're done with the tugging and pulling with the photographer and everybody else that wants to see them. So, you know, there's another thing that we do now that we didn't really used to do a long time ago. It's called personal letter reading. So bride and grooms usually exchange a short letter before they get married or before they have first look on each other. And it's basically a paragraph or two about, you know, why I love you and why I'm marrying you and you're the most important thing, you know, that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
And we actually have them read their letters. So the bride will read her letter to the groom, and then the letter is exchanged over to the groom. The groom opens the letter. We film him reading.
Ooh.
And in the video, she's speaking to him.
Oh.
Do you follow me?
Yeah.
Because she had just read it earlier.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we will take that very powerful love note and message from one to the other and include bits and pieces of that in the highlight.
Oh, wow.
And what happens is when people see that kind of stuff in the highlight, it just adds so much more people understand why the two of them are getting married.
Again, to me, it comes back again and again and again to emotion.
Right.
It's capturing that emotion.
Right.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. I mean, when I have brides that either love that idea or don't want to do it because they're just shy. And I said, you know, I think you should do it. It'd be private. You can have it on your long version. And the only ones that are going to see it are you and your husband and your kids. So a lot of times I'll do rehearsal dinners. People think rehearsal dinners, you just go and eat. And a lot of times the people that would never get up during the wedding day to say anything have their chance to say something to the bride and groom on the rehearsal dinner.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I find out how they met. I find out all the backstories about, you know, he asked her for 7-8 months to go out. And she finally gave in and said she'd go out with him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good storytelling that builds the bride and groom's story before they go down the aisle. I'll put that into the highlight.
Is that real typical videographers at the rehearsal dinners? I don't know if people think of that.
We maybe do 30 or 40% rehearsal dinners.
Yeah.
We only really do them for large weddings where you know there's going to be a lot of people want to say something.
See, but when I hear this, to me, this is a must-have. If it fits in the budget, this is a must-have.
I think so.
Yeah.
And it's a small fee on top of the wedding for us to come to rehearsal dinner. And I have some people, that aren't sure about it. I have a couple of highlights that have some great storytelling toasts that were done at rehearsal dinner.
That's right.
And after they see that, they go,
Well, I'm going to take this to another level because I'm thinking, with my company in the music business, Kushner Entertainment, for me, I take this to a whole nother level. I don't just send a video and a price. I want to meet with the clients. I want to really talk. And my team, we really get to know them ahead of time. And I'm thinking, same for you. You're getting this, and not just the process of meeting them and talking to them, but you're there for something like the rehearsal dinner. You're getting so much more information, backstory.
Right.
It's going to affect you the next day at the wedding. And for me, it's the same thing. I inform, the bands, a lot of details and information so that there's something more to it that night. So that, again, it's more personalized. So I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. It's a lot of times when you don't do rehearsal dinner and you're coming in, let's say I never met with the bride and groom, just talked on the phone. So to come in cold like that,
yeah,
it takes a while for you to know who the players are and what's going on. I always like to meet with people ahead of time, find out what they're all about. Rehearsal dinner is great. I even do love stories. And these love stories are films that are shot maybe 4 or 5 months ahead of time. And we sit down with the bride and groom and they talk about how they met. They talk about why they're getting married.
So it's almost like a legacy film right there.
Right.
That aspect of it.
Right. And so a lot of times those films are played on a large screen just before the bride and groom are introduced into the room.
Oh, what a great idea.
So I'll give you one. I do a lot of Indian weddings, and I did a love story, and they had 750 people at an Indian wedding. Well, at Indian weddings, you have some important people that are family, and then you got a lot of business people. They invite everybody on the planet.
I know 1,000 people. Yeah,
right.
It happens.
So what happened is I did this love story, and we played it on the screen, and literally everybody there, even associated business people, understood why the bride and groom were there to get married that day after seeing that film. You brought them into the reason, what led up to the wedding day.
Yeah.
So it's just another way of fully letting everybody know what you guys are all about.
So I got one more question for you. How do you, Bill, define success?
Well, I think if you're happy with what you do and you're satisfied. So like I'm going to go back to the driving home after an event, and I'm happy and I know I've done a good job. And I know the client's going to flip when they see what we got for them. Yeah. That's happiness to me. I don't have to make it $5 million. I don't need to be, the most expensive guy on the block or the most popular guy. My satisfaction is when people see my films and they send me an email that just goes WOW. That's happiness.
Yeah.
It's like having a good meal. It's like your wife making you your favorite meal. You're happy.
Yeah.
You're content. So probably a boring answer, but
No. I love it. So actually there is one more question. How do people find out more about the company and best way to reach you?
My website, suburbanvideo.com.
Suburbanvideo.com.
And I've got corporate on there. I've got legacy, and I've got our social page. So a lot of my corporate came from my social. So when I first started out, all weddings, no corporate. And then I wound up doing all the Marriott girls' weddings. And then all of a sudden I'm doing host Marriott work. I'm doing corporate work. So a lot of my corporate has come from high-end weddings. So it's kind of an incestuous thing there.
So in terms of getting straight to your social media, what is that?
Just at Suburban Video.
Got it. Well, Bill, this has been a pleasure. All these years I've known you, and I got more on you now. I love it. It was great. Thank you.
Okay, so when are you going to do a podcast for Andy?
Well, actually, I've been interviewed on many podcasts. People can go to the Wedding Biz and look at the About page. Thank you for asking that. And I did not ask you to do that, did I? No. I didn't ask you to say that.
No.
Well, thanks for being on the show.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my interview of Bill Bowen. Check out his site at suburbanvideo.com. Again, suburbanvideo.com. And also his handles for social media platforms is the same, Suburban Video. Be sure to check out our show notes and our website at theweddingbiz.com. And would love for you to share this episode with your friends and colleagues and spread the word. That helps us to grow our audience and community, and we've got so much happening down the line. Don't forget to listen Wednesday on The Next Level, again with my guest co-host Valerie Gernhauser, when we talk about the top tips that we got out of Bill's interview. And next week, this is real exciting to announce, is part 2 of my interview of the iconic planner designer David Stark. Some weeks ago, I re-released part 1. If you missed it, you got to check it out. Went to New York City when I went to interview Colin for a second time, and I also interviewed David for the second time. So that'll be coming out soon. And I want to thank our sponsors, Kushner Entertainment. You can find it at kushnerentertainment.com, and OFD Consulting, which is at ofdconsulting.com. One last thing before I go, I would love if you write me and let me know what you think of the show, who you would like me to interview, any comments that you have to give. Would love to hear from you. And my personal email is andy@theweddingbiz.com. Again, andy@theweddingbiz.com. Thanks for listening to The Wedding Biz.